and a very warm welcome to this digital conference organized by FSC Germany, which of course means the Forest Stewardship Council. My name is Maria Grunwald. I'm a German journalist and I will be your host today. What is the main idea of this conference? Well, this conference comprises or includes 6 different talks, 6 different discussions. And we started last December talking about the question if voluntary FSC certification is a story of success or rather a story of failure. And this very first question shows already that FSC Germany really has the aim with this conference to talk in a critical way about the pros and the contras of FSC certification worldwide. And at the second talk, we talked about challenges and benefits of FSC certification in the Congo Basin. And right now, today, we're going to talk about advantages and disadvantages of FSC certification in Russia. And well, let us remember, Russia includes more than 20% of the world's forest, which makes Russia the largest forest country in the world. And of course, we are talking about the boreal forest, mostly the coniferous forest. And there's also still a lot of intact forest landscape still there. But we have a lot of problems going on in Russia, mismanagement, corruption. We also have a problem of illegal logging going on. And we also have the problem of large-scale clear-cutting, which is also still possible in Russia. And of course, that puts in danger the boreal forest. And we want to see today if FSC certification in Russia can help out here or not. That will be the question for today. And before I say hello and a very warm welcome to our wonderful speakers, here are some rules of the game. Don't worry, there are not so many. We have in total 90 minutes for the discussion, and it's my job to talk with our experts, to interview them for the first or during the first hour of this event. But the last half an hour or even a little bit more will be your time, audience time. You can ask questions. And I have to explain a little bit how you can ask questions since we're doing all this here online. You can send, it's a very old but effective way, you can send an email if you want to. It's a German email address, so let's switch to German. You can send an email with your question to konferenz@fsc-deutschland.de. And the organizers will monitor those questions and send them to me. The easiest way to put a question through will be to use the Q&A button. If you have Zoom right now in German, then it would be called F&A, Frage und Antwort button. If you have that button, then a chat will open up and there you can put your question. That's probably the most easiest way to do it. And you also have the opportunity, since you're using Zoom, you also have the opportunity to raise your hand. There's a button under your video window, and there you can press it, and then you can raise the button, Handheben auf Deutsch. If you do that, the organizers will monitor that, and then actually you can ask your question all by yourself in your own words. That means we will hear your voice. That's also possible. But the last times, most of the people use the chat button, so feel free to do it. We invite you to make this a lively debate. But please remember, and I will remember you that, please remember to ask really questions. We don't need very long comments because this is not about monologues. This here is about a discussion with hopefully clear questions and clear answers. Thank you very much for that. And now I will introduce you to our wonderful speakers today. And I will start with Nikolai Schmatko. Nikolai Schmatko is director of FSC Russia. He's joining. And well, I asked all of our speakers if they could share with us 3 hashtags that describe them or describe their work. So here are the hashtags from Nikolai. He says, I'm forester by heart. No surprising. He says, I'm a big fan of NGOs because I never ever worked for the Russian government and I also don't want to work for the Russian government. So he's a big fan of NGOs. And then he also shares a personal hashtag with us. He says, well, I'm a father of 5 kids, and I think he must have a lot of management qualities if he is a father of 5 kids. And he says, I also asked for the biggest problem regarding management and protection of boreal forest. And he says, my government does not care at all about the protection of intact forest landscapes. Intact forest landscapes have no value for the Russian government, and that's one of the biggest problems. Thank you very much for joining us today. The next in the row here, in my window at least, is Andrew Chegolet. Andrei Chegolet. He's head of forest program at WWF, the Worldwide Fund for Nature, Russia. He is joining us from Arkhangelsk, which is in the very northern west of Russia, very remote region, lots of forest there. And I just asked him how cold is it right now, because I imagine that it must be very cold. He said we have 30 degrees, but minus 30 degrees minus. So he's still there. I hope you're warm there, Andrei. And his hashtags are I love forest conservation. His second hashtag is I'm a troublemaker. And I ask, oh, why? Troublemaker? And he says, yes, I'm a troublemaker for my colleagues if they don't want to try something new, or if they don't want to go on with a new initiative to improve the work, then I'm a troublemaker. And I said, okay. And last, he also shared a personal hashtag. He says, I love cooking. He likes cooking something new, so he also experiments a bit in his kitchen. And he says the biggest problem in Russia is the forest management system itself, which is only focused on harvesting as much as possible and also in primeval forests. Thank you for joining us today. And next to him, at least in my view, in my window, is Natalia Lukina. She is director of the Center for Forest Ecology and Productivity at the Russian Academy of Science. And she is joining us from Moscow. Her hashtags are hashtag forest science. I think that's pretty clear. Second hashtag is cooperation, because she says all stakeholders in the forest sector should cooperate much more. And her third hashtag is she's a big fan of her grandchildren. I thought that's very nice. And she says Russia needs a new forest law. And she, along with other scientists, published last year a concept for a new forest law, for a new forest code of the Russian Federation. If you want to look it up, it's also exists in an English version. It's called Forest Code of the Russian Federation, or Concept for a Forest Code. And she demands a shift from the current model of wood mining to a model of much more investment in forest growing. That's what she said. That's the biggest change they want to get through with that new concept. Then we also thank for joining us, Natalia. Then we also say hello to Susanne Winter, Dr. Susanne Winter. She's joining us from Germany, from Berlin. She's program manager of forests at WWF Germany. Her hashtags are, the first one, she's always dedicated to improve forest management. Second hashtag, she is a fan of a very powerful environmental chamber within FSC. And her third hashtag is also personal. She says, I love the quality life in rural areas. Her office is in Berlin, but she lives nearby Berlin in a rural area, and she likes that very much. She says, the biggest problem with FSC certification in Russia is that almost nothing changed for better since FSC started working in Russia, and she refers especially to large-scale clear cuttings. So that's her example. She says large-scale clear cutting are still common practice, and she also conducted a study. We will hear more about that later. And last but not least, I think he's still not here. I just have to check. No, we have one more expert from Greenpeace Russia, Alexei, which probably is joining us in a couple of minutes. So I just have to ask. No, he's not there. I think I will introduce him because I'm pretty sure that he will join us. He was very eager to do this discussion. He will join us maybe a little bit later. So I will introduce him. And then later we can also talk with him. Alexei Yaroshenko, I already said it, is head of forest unity at Greenpeace, Russia. He would be joining us from Moscow if he would be here. And he is very critical, and he has very critical points of view regarding forestry in Russia, because he says there's no forestry at all in Russia. There is only forest consumption. That's what he says. That's what he says. Sorry, I just lost a little bit of my windows here. Well, and regarding FSC in Russia, he says that there was a lot of hope when FSC started working in Russia 20 years ago. Forest campaigners like him dreamed of a new gold standard, but nowadays the dream of a gold standard is over. Okay, let us remember that Greenpeace was a member of FSC, but in many countries, for example, Germany, but also in Russia, Greenpeace left FSC because from the point of view of Greenpeace, FSC allows an industrial use of primeval forest. And actually, I wanted to start with Alexei since he was so critical about FSC, but now I'm starting with Dr. Susanne Winter because she's also very critical about FSC. And I already said it, Dr. Winter, you conducted a study and you compared clear-cut areas with FSC certification and non-FSC certification. So it was a comparative study. What would you say was the main result of that study?
Yeah, the main result is that we looked for ecosystem-based differences on the ground. So we compared clear cuts and size and how much ecosystem services are remained on these clear cuts. And so we can say that as all in all, we didn't find so many differences. Perhaps I can later use some slides to show a little bit this. But first result, it is that the risk related to landscape, for example, hydrology and forest fires, the clear cuts accelerate risk of more destruction, and the same to global warming induced changes.
Talk about FSC. One of the results certification shows no significant ecological improvement in forest management in comparison to non-FSC certified areas. And you also said that an equally high amount of timber was extracted on an FSC site and also on a non-FSC site. Nikolai, that's why I like to ask you, if it makes so little difference, as we have heard right now, between an FSC certified area and a non-FSC certified area, what are the advantages of FSC?
The advantages of FSC, we can see them first of all at the landscape level. Of course, we can and probably should compare one clear cut, FSC certified clear cut, and not FSC certified clear cut, but in many cases, clear cut is a clear cut. But if we look from a helicopter view on forest landscapes, I'm sure we can see the difference. Let's take, for example, intact forest landscapes. Right now, about 6 million hectares of intact forest landscapes are FSC certified. So half of this area is preserved by FSC certified companies. And it is done in the contrary to the Russian legislation, because Russian legislation see intact forest landscapes as just commercial forests, which are underused. And actually, some companies have got punishments from protecting too much intact forest landscapes. Also, I may agree that companies should leave more retention trees, for example, or key biotopes and some other elements of the forest at the clear cuts. And now the new Russian standard is approved. Now there is a threshold. A company have to leave at least 10% of the forest area untouched on these so-called clear cuts. So I hope this will allow for better preservation of the forests during logging. And one more thing I have to say, that selective logging in some forests in Russia, for example, in spruce-dominated forest, may ruin this forest actually. It may have a really bad effect on the stand. Trees may get fungi disease, and trees may fall down. So in some types of forests, such as spruce-dominated forest, selective logging is not a good idea.
Okay, Nikolai, but still help me to understand, why is it possible? Why just FSC? I mean, to put it in very simple words, why FSC just not simply prohibited clear cuts? I mean, if clear cuts is possible within an FSC area, I just don't understand that. Why was that possible?
A lot of stakeholders in Russia, including participants of the Standard Development SDG Standard Development Group, including social and environmental stakeholders, they do not see a clear cut as something, something evil by itself. Clear cuts can be different. Of course, the size of a clear cut matters. But even this hasn't been the center of any discussions within the standard development groups. So people in Russia, different stakeholders, not only from the economic chamber, they believe that clear cuts can be done in boreal Russia. The size and the boundaries, including landscape boundaries of this clear cuts, yes, that's something we should think of.
FSC would not campaign in order to really prohibit clear cutting.
I think it would be very interesting to learn the view from the science and WWF Russia, how they see this problem. But we never had this, this campaign within FSC, within Standard Development Group, or within stakeholders, forbid or take away their clear cuts. As I said, people don't see it as a big problem.
Okay. Well, let's ask the WWF. Andrei Shegolet, you work for the WWF in Russia, and you were also part of that study comparing FSC certified areas with non-FSC certified cutting sites. You also told me in advance that FSC is a valuable tool. What would you say? I mean, why is it possible to do clear cutting and still say it's not so bad, it's not such a big problem?
Yes, it's important to consider FSC not only on the level of clear cut, but also at landscape level, as Nikolai said in the beginning. So, in our view, the advantages of FSC is that it ensures protection of IFLs, big areas of IFLs. Without FSC, we wouldn't be able to communicate and to cooperate with logging companies in order to identify and protect the core areas of IFLs. Because IFLs, as Nikolai said, they are not valued for Russian government. So according to the law, IFLs, intact forest, it's allowed to cut there, according to the law. So, and from our perspective, it's important to protect the core areas of these landscapes.
And what would be a good solution? How could you protect much more those intact forest landscapes that we still have in Russia? It's true, we still have a lot of intact forest landscape in the boreal forest, but it's also true that we have a big loss every year. I mean, the number comes from Nikolai. You told me that 1.6 million hectare average of IFL are lost every year, or go lost every year, are cut down somehow. So what would be a solution to protect better IFLs? If you already understood the problem, what needs to be done right now, Andrei?
So yes, the first step is provided by FSC. It's a temporary decision on protection of IFLs. I mean, voluntary ban agreements with organ companies. We consider it is a good step forward, but it's not enough. It's important to get the official protective status of those areas, and we work very closely with the government, both federal and regional level, in order to get this protective status of a protected area. So, but still there is no special place or space in the Russian legislation for IFLs, and we try to use different approaches. One of them is to establish protected areas. Another is to introduce special protective status for this forest, but still we believe that it's necessary to get the official protective status for these areas. And these areas are important not only for biodiversity conservation, but also for climate and carbon storage.
Yes, that's precisely also what interests a lot Susanne Winter, because she also is investigating about global warming or heating up, when the soil heats up, when there was a clear cut, or when IFL gets lost. Susanne Winter, do we need, what do you say, what is the most pressing problem if we lose intact forest landscapes? What is the most pressing behind?
Yeah, I think the value of intact forest is very, very large, and so we just have 1/4 of the forest in a natural condition, and so we would protect these forests at a global scale, not just in Russia, but also in the other places of the tropical forest where we still have them. But if I'm allowed to dive in a little bit more to the study once again, because I think it's important to understand. I do not deny the advantages of FSC in Russia, but it's also again and again said FSC is a forest management certification, and so it's absolutely necessary to look to the management of the forest when they are harvested. And so if this is possible, I would like to ask the first slide I prepared to come back to this question of these cutting systems. So both of you already mentioned, so it's not just the first one of the slides. The first one, yes, that's the first one, thanks. So we were talking about the cutting system, and so you can see here from our study, these black dots are the one black dot is one clear cut of the size of around 50 hectare, and so you have more or less a checkerboard system, and you cut 50 hectares and 50 not, and in the first one, and then some years later, so 6, and from the landscape level, you can imagine that the size of these clear cuts are much larger than the 50 hectares, because all these places will be cut in within 6-8 years. And so at the large scale, you get a landscape impact, and these clear cuts are not at the large scale and the landscape scale. They are not similar to natural incidents like fire or wind throw, for example. So please go for the next. What we did in the study, we had a stakeholder consultation to find out what is relevant in the FSC standard, what should be tested and studied outside. And so this is just to give you an overview that several meetings with a lot of stakeholders resulted in the variables we looked at. And so the next slide, please. Finally, we had a selection of 95 variables. Perhaps you could go on. I still see the same slide. Yes, great. So we had a selection of 95 ecosystem-based variables, and you can see that most of the results regarding these variables were didn't show any difference to non-FSC certified areas. And I think this is the main part, that just some few variables showed a positive trend or a positive effect of FSC, and that was mainly by the diversity of natural regeneration. But on other variables, like very important ones like temperature at the clear cuts, please go to the next slide. We didn't find any differences. Like here, the amount of days with daily mean temperature more than 20 degrees. And as you remember, it's very cold in the rural zone in Arkhangelsk, and the study took place close to the place from Andre. And what you can see here, it is a difference of 20 to 30 days between the reference. The reference is a primeval forest and the clear cuts. So it's about 1 month longer warm at these areas. And so this has implications for the whole landscape. It warms up. And what the hypothesis was is that FSC changes that. So finally, it links between the clear cuts and the reference states. That was a hypothesis, but the results didn't show it. And the next is connected with that. It's on the biomass, yes, or as Andre, someone already said, Nikolai already said, biomass, if you harvest everything, it's gone. But the assumption was that under FSC you have more retention trees. And please change the slide if possible. Yes, and so once again we didn't find any differences between these cutting systems. And yeah, the assumption was that FSC somehow works differently on these places at a large scale. Yeah, please, the next slide. The overall conclusions. So we say that the current forestry practices induce really unprecedented changes of biomass and land cover on a real landscape level, not just on each of these clear cuts, but at the landscape level. And as I already mentioned, the risk related to landscape hydrology and forest fires increase. Also, it is clear that finally we will have a decreased productivity under the same climate conditions as a consequence of loss of resilience, micro and mesoclimate changes, as well as global warming induces, as I tried to show you these results with a temperature over 20 degrees. And so what we finally saw that the FSC, neither as the conventional forest manager, doesn't address this level, the global warming, the mitigation of global change. And I think this is key. And so now I come back to your question. All these services are provided by the intact forest landscapes, and so this is really key to maintain them.
Okay, well, listening again to all those consequences, Nikolai, sorry, I have to ask once again. I mean, we have a database there, and we heard the consequences, and so I ask once again, why is it so difficult to say in FSC certified areas clear cutting won't be possible? Why is that so difficult to make that a standard, that large scale clear cutting should not happen there?
As I mentioned, a lot of people in Russia, including the companies, NGOs, they do not see clear cuts as something really bad thing by itself. Clear cuts can bring benefits to the forests, and clear cuts can also damage the forest, of course. I have to say several things actually. First of all, we are not talking about any form of deforestation. It's not happening. The boreal forest in Russia is not gone away just because of clear cuts. All these clear cutted area are regenerated naturally by the local trees. We don't use any exotic species like many countries do in Europe. Trees are regenerated naturally. This natural regeneration also has this model of coin of natural regeneration has two sides, and I can talk about that later. Because definitely forest regeneration is one of their problematic things in Russia. Also, I have to say that yes, from one perspective, companies are changing the landscape temporarily till it is regenerated by natural processes, as I said. On the other way, only during last 3 years and only in Arkhangelsk region, 3 protected areas have been established by FSC certified companies working together with the regional government and NGOs. And these 3 protected areas are protecting 500,000 of intact forest landscapes, protecting forever. As I said, it's happening when the Russian government doesn't see any environmental value, unfortunately, in intact forest landscapes. So isn't it something good which is brought by FSC? And my final comment is that we are definitely working on improvement of the Russian standard, and there is some understanding that yes, more trees has to be left on clear cuts. So as I said, the new Russian standard, which is put into force this year, it obliges the companies to have 10% of the forest untouched on the clear cuts. Maybe 10 forests is not enough, but this is the consensus between chambers in Russia. So let's hope that this would be improved.
Yeah, so you said with the new standard, 10% of the area from one company needs to be untouched, which maybe isn't enough. You would like to have more.
Not of the area, but of the clear cut. So 10% of, that's important.
Okay, just to make that clear. But you by yourself said, okay, the Russian government doesn't recognize the importance of the IFL, of the intact forest land. So, of course, you are not a politician, you don't make the laws, but you can create awareness. So how can you create more awareness so that politicians finally understand the importance of IFL? That's a big problem.
I think that this is the role of the Russian science. Actually, one of many roles of the Russian science, to produce some materials which could be easily understood by the Russian politicians and make them think that intact forest landscapes are just smaller intact patches of the natural forest, are absolutely crucially important for the climate, for biodiversity, for the local cultures too. So unfortunately, so far very few scientific papers have been produced in Russia to show these values. And we have to refer to to some international papers, and that's not very welcomed by the Russian government. So I think that we should create, together with NGOs and with the science, a powerful coalition actually, and try to influence both the leaders of the companies and the leaders of the country about these values of natural forests.
Well, thanks very much. And let's talk to the science, since we also have here Natalia Lukina, and she's from the Russian Academy of Science. I already said that. And she's not so focused on FSC. Natalia, you are more focused on Russian politics and that legal side, I would say. And that's why you said Russia needs a new forest law. And you and your colleagues from the Russian Academy of Science debated on that, and you published last year a concept for a new forest code. What would you say is the biggest change which would come along with that new forest code? What would be the biggest change in comparison to the current system?
Yeah. As for a new forest law, why we need a new forest law? We need for many reasons, of course, but the main reasons. First of all, it is necessary to say that very huge mistake is leasing forests in Russia, because of leasing on the basis of the civil code. It is impossible to imagine, because our tenants, they are not interested in preserving forest and reforestation, because this instrument for forest is not good, of course. I mean leasing forest. And in our concept of forest law, we said about this, and we think that it is the main mistake of forest law we have now. And the second one is that the forester was removed from forest now. We have virtualization and digitalization of our forestry now. I can say that a number of foresters in forest now one order of magnitude lower than earlier. And because it is one of the main reasons of forest fires also, because we have very few foresters in our forests. And also in our concept of forest law, we say that it is necessary to move from the model of wood mining to model of forest growing. And
Regina, Natalia, could you explain to the German audience, sorry for interrupting, could you explain the concept of wood mining, which we have in Russia? What is wood mining?
Wood mining, it is extraction of timber in natural forest, not growing, only to extract timber in natural forest. We think that it is necessary to move to the model of forest growing. Including forest plantation, tree plantations, but not only to extract timber in natural forests. And combination of this, I mean model of wood mining and forest in lease, it is awful combination. And as I said already, our tenants were not interested in forest reproduction and also in conservation of forests, because it is only leasing, it is rent. We think that it is big mistake. And also, what it is necessary to say that we have the problems also. Russian forests grow in various natural and climatic conditions. They are very different, and it is impossible to have uniform rules for all forests from the center. We need to have federalization against centralization, you understand? Because we have very, very different conditions for forests, and it is impossible. We need to have different solutions for different forests. And because of that, we have, of course, very many other reasons, but maybe these main reasons why we need new forest law. Because we can, of course, say about opportunities of FSC, scientific organization, our numerous suggestions, proposals, but it is impossible to implement them if we have old forest law. And yes,
sorry, because you just mentioned it, talking about political commitment. Now you had this debate going on, scientific debate going on a new forest code. You already published that that concept for a new forest code. What makes you so sure that politicians right now will listen and will really implement the new forest law? Will that happen in 2 years?
Yes. We start to do that because Dmitry Medvedev several years ago said that we need forest law. He said that. And we started to do it. And as for now, yes, we organize some kind of platform for discussion of concept of our forest law. I mean, including platform in our journal, special in our journal, Forest Issues in Russia, yes. And also we have discussed, we had some debates also in some business companies. Also, we have some positive reaction and negative reactions also, especially when we say that we are against leasing of forest. We have different opinions, but still we are discussing, and we think that maybe we will have some positive reaction from our politicians also. At least we have some signs for that.
Okay, so you see a chance that it could be implemented in a couple of years maybe. Andrei, one of the things that Natalia said was that we need to shift the model from wood mining to growing forests, to actually do much more for reforestation. What would you say would be a good first step? What could be done very easily in order to have a better quality of reforestation, which right now basically doesn't happen in Russia?
Say that it's not an easy way, but the first step is already done. So the legislation which allows to introduce this new system of forest tending, of forest growing, is already approved by the government for the several forest districts with a total area about 40 million hectares, and it's possible now to implement new system of intensive but sustainable forestry. But still it's not very active. I mean, the process is not very active, and it's necessary to encourage companies to introduce this system. So far we see that only few companies on the way of introduction of this system, because it's hard to introduce it now, and it's requires additional changes of legislation. As I said, yes, it's approved by government, but it's not complete yet, and it needs to be modified and improved. So, but still, I believe that this is the only way how to make forestry and forest management in Russia more effective, and it's necessary to make a shift from the old system of wood mining to the new one, which assume carrying of forest system of thinning and reforestation.
Okay, so we want to shift the model. I think all of us, as we are sitting here, would like to change that model from wood mining to a more sustainable model. And of course, it's pretty clear that for that we need some political pressure. And that's what we were talking also about. So, do we need more pressure upon Russian politicians to create stricter rules? And if so, how should NGOs like WWF put on such pressure? Nikolai talked about also international pressure. So, Susanne Winter, this question goes for you. How can NGOs put more pressure on Russian politics?
I'm sorry, this question was addressed to whom? To Susanna or to me? To me.
Nikolai, to Susanna, yes.
To Susanna. Okay.
So it's to me, the question, okay. Okay, so the environmental but also the social chambers within FSC have to be strengthened, and I think this is one main point globally for FSC, that we are faced with a shrinking civil space, and the FSC standard not only in Russia will get weaker when the civil society is not strong. And we can see that also in other countries, also in Germany, that the power of NGOs is not comparable strong as the economic chambers. So finally, we do not have the capacity to include the environmental and social aspects in the way that is needed and to lobby for it. And I think this is the main point, how the governments and policy can be informed about our requirements, environmental requirements, social requirements, if we can really address and communicate that in a somehow diverse and loud way. But I think this is one of these main problems why environmental issues are weakened in FSC or weaker in FSC standard than economic issues, and why it's not so well heard by policy and governments.
But in theory, Susanne Winter, in theory, all the three chambers, the economical one, the environmental one, and the social one, are equal. That's the idea of FSC.
Yes, that is absolutely the idea, but how that is brought to life, I think this is not, for example, the annual conference of FSC. The rules are very, very clear that all the chambers have the same rights, but the work in between on the standards, for example. These we know from so many standard revisions that the NGO participation is quite weak. This is one part, is that the NGOs do not have so many human power to do so. And the other point is that colleagues really tell us that they really fought for example, smaller clear cuts and so on, but they couldn't get it through.
And this was, of course, the moment where Nikolai wants to jump in. I saw your raised arm. So you probably want to say something because I said in theory all chambers are equal, but as you have heard, Susanne Winter wishes for a much stronger environmental chamber and also social chamber. Oh, we can't hear you. Maybe you have to.
Oops. I wish that in FSC Russia we have a more powerful social chamber, but I wanted to make a comment on another thing. My advice, let's not put pressure on my government. That does not work. So I think that we shouldn't think about pressure, about putting pressure on the government. I think we should think about establishing partnerships. And I think that there is a lot of room for establishing partnerships between the regional forest management authorities, NGOs, and big corporate consumers from Europe who consume timber from Russia. I think that there can be partnership projects established to improve the quality of forest regeneration and pre-commercial thinnings. And I think it is in the good interests of the big corporate consumers from Europe to have a steady and sustainable supply of timber in Russia. And also these initiatives may contribute to better landscape planning, to working on the size of clear cuts and many other things. I think this is more promising way to go.
Okay, and if you're already saying, okay, don't put too much pressure on my government because that just doesn't work, maybe with Putin, we can imagine that. And you say we need more cooperation between the regional stakeholders and the big companies, etc. What about the European market? Because a lot of the timber from Russia goes to the European market, and a lot of timber also goes to China. I mean, do we need also in those countries more awareness to take care of the supply chain? I mean, at least in Europe, we do have a timber regulation which says no illegal timber should be placed in the European market. But China, for example, doesn't have it. Would that be a good way also?
We are actually right now trying to at least search for the opportunities to work with the Chinese market. We don't see a lot of room right now working with the Chinese domestic market, but working with the Chinese consumers who buy timber from Russia, then produce, I don't know, tables and chairs and sell it to North America and European Union. That could be a niche to grow FSC because it is highly needed in Siberia, because we may argue about sustainability of FSC. Is it sustainable at the local level or landscape level? In Siberia, we have other problems. Sometimes we have problems with legality there, and the FSC, I'm sure it can make a change within the legality, just basic stuff. So I think this is the way to go, both for China and European market.
So thank you very much. I would say that right now we can open up already for the audience because we already have some questions in the chat. And I will start with one question which goes to all of you. Actually, it comes from Magnus Deinzer, and he's asking Natalia and the other Russian experts of Keros. Actually, he wants to know something. It is so, and he says, please correct me. Is it so that in Russia, the not FSC certified companies exclusively do forest mining and the FSC certified companies do, is that true, clear cutting, but do also then ensure a proper regeneration of those clear cut areas? So I think he wants to know once again, what's the difference? I mean, both companies with an FSC concession or without an FSC certification do clear cutting or do forest mining or wood mining, as we call it. But if you do it under the FSC seal, then at least there is more regeneration or reforestation. Is that true?
me? As I said, yes, yes. Yes, we had the problems with reforestation also in FSC certified areas, of course, because they are also our FSC way. We are working with our tenants, renters, and as I said, that our tenants were not interested in reforestation because they have leasing forests. I think the reason is in this, in leasing forests.
Okay.
Also, and with FSC or without FSC doesn't mean.
Nicola, could you maybe explain us a little bit more, because it's basically a German audience, could you explain us a little bit more, what am I obliged to do if I have an FSC certification? Am I obliged to do reforestation or not?
So, first of all, you are obliged to have a good dialogue with NGOs and local stakeholders about preservation of high conservation value forests. And 35% from the total area of FSC certified forests in Russia are acknowledged by the companies to be high conservation value forests, and 20% of the area is preserved by the companies from logging. Unfortunately, the quality of reforestation, specifically near roads, by commercially valuable local species, and the quality of pre-commercial thinnings still is a problem for both FSC certified companies and not FSC certified companies. However, those companies who are establishing very good stands, who make a lot of efforts in proper reforestation and good quality pre-commercial thinnings, they are all FSC certified. It's Elim Group, it's Metsia, it's IKEA, and several others. However, this is a problem with even some FSC certified companies. We are working on that. We acknowledge this problem. We are starting several initiatives together with NGOs and their companies within FSC Russia to improve the quality of reforestation and pre-commercial thinnings within FSC. It's very important for us in the next year, 2 years. We are going to have some breakthrough here. I hope for that.
You said you hope for that. You just hope, or you're sure?
You cannot be sure about anything in Russia, but we are definitely finding the way, and we are within the board of FSC and Standard Development Group. We are working on that.
Okay, you're still optimistic. From the very same person, Magnus Deinzer, it's also a question. Just to understand it a little bit more, he wants to know what is the maximum clear-cut size in Russia for not FSC certified areas? The maximum
I think I think it's the same for FSC and not FSC. I think it's as far as I remember, it's 50 hectares. Andrei, is that right or not?
Yes, that's right, and it's the same for FSC and non-FSC companies. 50 hectares.
So it sounds like a lot, but I know that we come from 200 hectares. I mean, like in the 90s, it was still possible to clear cut 200 hectares. Is that right?
But Maria, when we are thinking about all these huge hectares of clear cuts, let's think about density of roads. In Germany, I don't know, in Finland and in Russia, it's so different. We almost have no roads in Russia. I mean, in the forests, and this is good from biodiversity point of view. What is better, to make a large size clear cut or fragment the landscape forever by permanent roads to ensure good quality selective logging? It's a big question.
Okay, you see. Well, let's check. We have some more questions here in the chat. And there is Herr Schmidt, he doesn't say first name, and he asks, how is the interdependency or the relationship between Russian exploitation of gas or of oil or of rare earths to export into Western countries and forest destruction? How's the relationship? I mean, how are they linked together? The exploitation of gas, of oil, and the forest destruction. Is that a big challenge there? Maybe Andrei?
But I don't see the connection between oil extraction and wood extraction. Maybe it sounds similar, like extraction, but there are different processes. But still, yes, when we talk about all system of forest management, it looks like timber extraction when the company come to the so-called wood or logs deposit, extract this and go away. Yes, it looks similar, but still there are different processes.
Mm-hmm.
However, the oil mining industry and gas mining industry may bring some problems to the forest, and that is human-induced forest fires, for example, and also fragmentation of natural forests by the pipelines or energy lines. So that's, of course, this is a problem for the forest, and FSC, fortunately or unfortunately, can do nothing with the oil mining industry. It's out of our scope.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then we have another question. I'm afraid it goes again to Nikolai, but Yvonne Albert, she wants to know if we have an FSC auditor, the people who control that FSC standards are kept up. If an FSC auditor notices clear-cutted areas or other violations against FSC standards, why isn't the certificate withdrawn immediately?
So, as I said, in Russia, stakeholders are in consensus that clear cuts is not a big problem by itself. Of course, there is awareness that more trees has to be left, and as I said, the standard is improved now. But what I mean, but back to the question about the auditors. Actually, this is happening. This is happening all the time. So the total area of FSC certified forest in Russia is 57 million hectares. And every year, 1 or 2 million hectares is suspended or withdrawn certificates. So some people use it as a criticism, like, "Hey, look, what's happening in the forests? Certificates are taken away from the companies." But for me, that's an indication that auditors are working with the companies, and certificates are suspended actually when the violations are really serious.
Okay, so they have to be really serious, and then actually we have consequences. Nikolai, you by yourself, you said one of the solutions could be, because if you say clear cutting is not considered as such a big problem in Russia because it's just such a big country with such large forests, but still you by yourself proposed that one of the solutions could be that we have a better regulation of the cut rates. So we have stricter rules for the cut rates. What would be a good rule to reduce the cut rate or to regulate it better?
I think that first of all, a good landscape planning has to be established. So there should be a consensus what areas of the forest can be logged, what areas should be left untouched, what areas should be re-established by natural regeneration, and what areas has to be established by after logging or windfalls regenerated by artificial regeneration, by planting commercially valuable trees, and by providing good quality pre-commercial thinnings. So I think that there should be a balance here. So good landscape planning, I think. and good information about forests.
Okay, a better landscape planning. Susanne Winter, there's another question. It's once again about clear cutting. Yeah, well, the German audience is also very interested in clear cutting, because for us in Germany, it really sounds a lot. 50 hectares, of course, it sounds a lot. So here goes another question regarding that, and it is from Michael Kutschke to Susanne Winter. Which size of clear cuts would you think is still somehow sustainable?
As I already said in the beginning, so a single clear cut, it's always about a general rule, and that is really the problem, because as I demonstrated at the beginning, one clear cut doesn't matter. But if you have that again and again at a large scale, and that influences the landscape level, then it is certainly an issue. So finally, clear cuts, I think the size should be reduced to a minimum. I think it should be a new system of forest management, that no clear cuts are done, or as Andre sometimes explained, to transform the clear cut to have more retention trees. And so finally, from our German classification, the clear cut could be transformed to remaining canopies, also including old trees. And I think this is one of the main points, that there are no standing old trees anymore. So you reduce the whole forest age. And so I think the minimum area, to be precise, should be less than 1 hectare.
Okay. But you focus clearly on the reforestation, or to leave some the retention trees, as we call it. Yeah,
yes.
You focus more
yes.
on that. Okay. So Nikolai,
for Russia, and
I think that this is a good proposal, but it may work in the areas, for example, near Moscow or St. Petersburg or some big cities where we have good system of roads. And actually, I wish Alexei Yeroshenko from Greenpeace would be here. He's also pushing for this, promoting this idea, small areas of clear cuts near big cities, for example, or in well-developed rural areas. But unfortunately, for Siberia, for Archangelsk region, I don't think that this is realistic. This small size of clear cut. As I was trying to explain, first of all, for the road system, because if there is no roads, these small clear cuts may produce more damage to the landscape, actually, from my point of view.
I think we perhaps I can add a small explanation. I think what is the idea is not to build more roads. I think especially in Germany we have too many roads, forest roads, and this is really a certain kind of fragmentation in our German forest, and so it shouldn't be copied. However, even if you go for these areas without permanent roads, it could be the transformation from the clear cut to a harvest with remaining trees. So I think that's the point, that clear cuts is always the easiest way to harvest a high volume of wood. But I think it's obvious that for all these ecosystem services we should let a high percentage of wood just there. And that is the point, without the consequence of more roads. And this is also, I fully agree with you, Nikolai, that this is that harms the ecosystem, and so it shouldn't be done. But I think the clear cut, as I demonstrated, has so many bad ecological implications and for climate change, that this should be transformed. And so the hashtag von Andre was to have new and innovative ideas. I think this could be one at a large scale to combine the ecosystem services at these large cutted areas.
Okay, thank you very much. I saw a raised hand from Dirk Riesenpart. He's always joining us for the German perspective. He's the chairman, of FSC Germany. And I think he wanted to say something. Is that correct? Or did I get you by surprise?
No, thank you so much. I'm not just waving my pen for fun. Thank you so much for everybody. I think this has already been a very valuable session. Just one word for me. I think I'm far from being recognized as a friend of clear cuts, but this discussion is, for me, is focusing a little bit too much on this a very important detail of a forest management standard. And I would actually have wished for a more diverse perspective of FSC. As you know, it's balanced between the three chambers, and we also have social and economic aspects that belong to FSC. And I would have wished to hear a little bit more also about the social aspects that come to bear when you have an FSC certification on the ground, and also about the economic chances that companies have when they are FSC certified compared to not being FSC certified. And the second aspect that might not be necessary to debate further today, but of course we will take back to the discussion with FSC International and also with our German members, is the economic interrelationship between Russia, the use of wood in Russia and all over the world, and also the consumption patterns that we have in Germany. And so if there is a still growing demand for certain kinds of timber coming from all over the world, of course, we needn't be angry or needn't wonder in Germany that forests in other parts of the world are actually diminishing because of our abuse, I call it, of resources. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dirk Riesenpart. You just mentioned, one of the points you mentioned was that FSC companies should have some more incentives, economic incentives, in order that they're working in a more sustainable way. And actually, that was one thing that Nikolai proposed in advance. He said we need more incentives for timber companies from the government, so in economic incentives from the Russian government for timber companies to establish something like long-term management plans and to really have an incentive to get FSC certified. So what could be a good incentive if they don't exist?
So, just to give you a little bit of context about investment climate in Russia in the forest sector, we don't have any private ownership on forests in Russia. And so when a company is investing in proper reforestation or good quality pre-commercial thinnings, they are investing into the state property, and they can be any moment of time denied from this property. So this land can be taken from the company and given to some other company for some reason. That can be a governmental decision. So I think from my government, that would be very wise to guarantee these investments into the proper reforestation, proper pre-commercial thinnings. It would be very wise, I think, to change the system of lease, as just Natalia said a few minutes ago, probably to take the payments from the company from area, not from the amount of wood they harvested. So companies would have more incentives to invest actually into the forest, not just to take from the forest.
Okay, thank you very much. We have in the chat, I'm checking the chat, and we have another question here from Herr Schmidt. And he says he's wondering because in Germany, he's argumenting with the German perspective. In Germany, we do have rules which say to us at a regional level, for example, which areas should remain untouched, in which areas tourism might have priority, or there are other safe areas, for example, for natural regeneration. We do have rules for that, and also on a regional level. Doesn't this exist in Russia, even though you have so many different types of forests and climates? And even
in theory, it exists actually, and every region of Russia, we have now 83 regions of Russia. So every region in Russia has their forest management plan. But unfortunately, it is developed usually without proper consultations with the business, with NGOs, with local communities. And in many cases, this plan remains to be a plan, just on paper, and not implemented actually on the ground. Right now, FSC Russia started a dialogue with several regions of Russia to establish councils, you may say, or working groups, which would bring together NGOs, regional authorities, and science to identify the areas, for example, the most valuable intact forest landscapes, identify them and ensure the protection. And also when I say about proper landscape management plans, I am saying exactly about that. These plans are needed, and they're not needed as they're just papers, but as the governing documents. There is a lot of difference in Russia between these two notions.
Okay, thank you very much. And he goes also.
Another problem is that those regional forest management plans are based on outdated inventory data. So it's a big problem for Russia.
So you need a modernization there because you don't have current data.
Yes, we don't have current or modern data, inventory data.
Okay,
as I remember, only 15% of area of Russian forests have a good data about them. And a lot of areas have been invented 20 years ago or 30 years ago, and still people are using this outdated information.
Okay. So that's still also a big task for science as well, to provide a database. And what about, Putin, he announced that by the year 22, he wants to modernize the forest management, and he precisely wants to offer a better database, and he wants to create a forest register. What do you think about these plans? Are they realistic, or is it just a Putin announcement? What would you say, Andrei? Is it just an announcement of Putin, or is it maybe a realistic plan?
So I think anyway it's a good step forward to have this announcement, but let's see how it will be realized in reality. So far we don't see any certain steps towards getting new good system of forest inventory or register. So still, yes, maybe it's because Russian forests are huge, but still, even so, for those forests which involve to the forest management, so we don't see any good steps toward this.
Okay, so you're pretty skeptical about it. I have another question in the chat. It comes from Uli Maleza, and he's asking, he's basically saying that in Germany and in Europe, there is already somehow an awareness that consumers try to buy wood which is certified. Yeah, somehow there is already a certain awareness, and also companies think or understood that it is important to trade with legal wood and to have a certification, and then they even sell better. And now he asks, how about the development of national demand from within Russia and consumer awareness within Russia? How about that? How do you create consumer awareness in Russia?
So in the last several years, we see very good growth in the domestic demand for FSC certified goods. But this demand is driven mostly by international companies, by do-it-yourself companies or retail sector, or the packaging companies like Tetra Pak with their international headquarters. They switch to FSC, and this is a very recycled, and this is a very good tool to increase the domestic market. However, their awareness of their final consumer about FSC is very low. And we are developing several initiatives to improve the situation, but it's not going to be easy, of course. Many people in Russia, they still look for the better price for the product, better quality, and not thinking about environmental issues. So it's the long way for us to go, but we started this way.
Okay. And then we have a last question here also in the chat, which is in German. I'll try to translate it. And actually, it's the question once again, if there is a database or if there are investigations about the differences between a natural reforestation. So you don't have a clear cut. Well, sorry, I tried to translate it once again. You have a clear cut on one side, and somehow after the clear cut, maybe a natural reforestation starts. And on the other side, you have areas in the forest where you also have reforestation. I mean, are there analysis investigations about that? I mean, how quick, for example, reforestation happens, natural reforestation or recuperation, sorry. Are there studies, do studies exist about that?
I'm sure that there are studies about that, but I cannot say exactly now. But still, yeah, there are two approaches. One of them is natural reforestation, and another one is artificial regeneration. But as for clear cut, I would say that the main thing is not as a large clear cut area, but what we leave there, what we retain there, how many patches of the forest we retain within clear cut area. And it calls further natural reforestation, and as much patches we leave within clear cut area, as faster we get natural regeneration.
But there are not so many data about that. We have another question here, which is again about the awareness in Russia. Herr Schmidt asks, how big is the public interest in your programs for forest management in Russia? Is there really a public interest in sustainable forest management? Does that exist?
Yes, I would say I would say that it's growing from year to year. So yes, there is a public interest because people go to the forest and they see that forests are harvested, and forests can be cut down near from their village. So that's why people are worried about, and they more and more interested in the questions of forest management, especially sustainable forest management.
Okay, Natalia, you told me that you debated quite a lot about what needs to be done in order to get a new forest law, and in all those debates in the last years, what would you say? Is there a lot of public interest in sustainable forest management in Russia? Or is it just little public interest?
Yes, I support that now. public interest in sustainable forest management is growing. In Scientific Council on Forests of the Russian Academy of Science, we also have many letters about some cases where we have clear cutting, for instance, close to the villages, and they ask us to explain them. Can we help them to solve the problems when they have cuttings around the villages? They think about that forest management is not sustainable, and yes, public interest now is high. We have a lot of demands from ordinary people, from villages, from small cities also. Yes.
Okay, so at least we can say it is growing. Public interest is growing. We hope that really works. I'm afraid we couldn't discuss everything, and we couldn't. And there are still a lot of problems maybe to be discussed, and also solutions to be discussed. But we will have to do it in another time. I just have a final question for all of you, and it's the very same question. The question maybe sounds entertaining, but actually it could be also very interesting. It's the same question for all of you. Imagine you could kidnap somebody, but not just somebody. Imagine you could kidnap a very important international politician, or a head of an NGO, or a very, very famous, maybe even internationally famous forest scientist. Imagine you could kidnap such a person, which has a lot of power, and you kidnap him or her, and you go with him deep into the woods, into the boreal wood, where there's basically nothing, where there's just beautiful nature, beautiful trees, beautiful plants, and you have 1 week with this important person to convince him to change something. Which international figure or person or Russian person would you choose and kidnap him or her and go into the woods and convince him for 1 week of something to improve? That's the question. I know it's a difficult question. It sounds entertaining, but let's see what your ideas are. Nikolai, you are laughing a bit at least. You're smiling a bit. So maybe you go first. Who would you kidnap?
Actually, I have two proposals.
Oh.
So the proposal number one, I will not share my thought against of the German and the international audience, unfortunately. So I will not say this name. But there is a person who decides everything in our country. But leave him alone. I'm not going to kidnap him. So I will kidnap a very famous singer. Does not matter, in Russia. So I will kidnap her, of course, and I will spend a lot of time in intact forest landscapes, and she will sing a lot for the forest, about the forests afterwards, about the need to preserve the forests. And singers in my country are almost as important as politicians. So I think I will go through the way of culture.
Okay, through the way of culture and through the way of famous singers that make the forest more popular. Andrei, do you know already who you would like to kidnap?
No, I don't have an exact idea who I can kidnap, but maybe I would say that one person is not enough, because it's almost important to have a dialogue, and as many people we will have for this dialogue, as better. So I would kidnap at least, I don't know, several people, at least 10, and because it's a better way to find a good solution.
Okay, so you would kidnap as many people as possible. I understood that. Natalia, is there somebody you would like to spend a week deep into the woods to convince him or her of improvements?
I also think that we need dialogue, and we need group of people. It is necessary to have dialogue. I also think so. It is not enough to have one woman.
Okay, so not one circle person, but you want to create awareness in a with a lot of people, or within a group of a lot of people. And Susanne Winter, you have the last word. Do you have somebody you want to kick?
Yes, I do. But I really like the idea to take several people to join me to stay in the forest, and so I would take some bosses from big companies, mainly one from a computer company who produces computers, and another one who produces electric cars, and who has a plan to fly to the Mars. I do not know the English name for that. And I would like to show the really fantastic forest, especially in Russia. So I was so honored to stay there in this great forest and so beyond the last village. And so I think I can convince them when we stay in these forests, in the intact forest landscapes, that it's much better to look at details in forest, to smell it, to feel the soil, and so on, and invest in this protection of these forests and in sustainable forest management. It's much better than to fly to another planet without a concrete or a positive result finally. And I think that could help in so many places. And if I convinced them, I think we can also convince other companies to do so.
Wow, okay, you want to convince with the beauty of the forest, with the beauty of nature. What a famous final word. Thank you very much. I really have to say thank you to all our wonderful speakers, to Nikolai Shmatkov, to Andrei Shegolev, Alexei Yaroshenko. He wasn't here. He's from Greenpeace Russia, and he really, really apologizes. He had a lot of technical problems, and it wasn't possible for him to join us. He tried, but he couldn't. So, but he really wanted to be here. And we also say thank you to Susanne Winter and to Natalia Lukina. Thanks very much for being here. And of course, also to Dirk Riestenput, always for the German perspective. And of course, I also say thank you. Oh, the TH, you know, the Germans always have problem with the TH. I say thank you to the German audience for your questions, for being interested. Please keep that up. Keep being interested. Keep being convinced of the beauty of nature, as Susanne Winter said. And I have some last information for you. The next discussion panel, number 4, will be about FSC certification in the Ukraine, and that will be on February 25th at 4 p.m. German time. And if you want to have more information about it, please find more information on the website conferenz.at. That is celebrated also in Russia. Because of Corona, of course, we are not really celebrating, but maybe you still have some nice hours today and you join a couple of people, and well, stay healthy. Thanks, bye-bye.